So emotional intelligence is going to come into play in each and every decision. There's a lot of scientific data that sort of routes how our thoughts go through our brains, and they start in the caveman, the animal, the reptilian center, the amygdala, and then it bounces into the rest of the brain where we come up with rationalizations after the fact. There's some of that we'll take shortcuts into, we'll hack into just because we understand the process. There's certain things in a negotiation. It's a good idea for me to make you stop and think when I need to get you to change your mind. And there are other times when actually I'm going to say things very specifically that are designed for easy for you to process so you can come to a decision with less effort.
Hello Sales Nation, I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman Podcast, and on this episode we have Chris Voss, and we're talking about negotiation. This is a standout episode. From my perspective, I learned a lot and I appreciate Chris's time. We'll definitely have him back on the show to dive into this further. And Chris himself is a 24-year veteran of the FBI and one of the world's leading practitioners of negotiation. You can find out more about him over at blackswanltd.com. He's got a new book out called Never Split the Difference, which is available on Amazon. We link to both of those in the show notes over at salesman.red. And with that said, no more faffing, let's jump into the episode itself. Hey Chris, and welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
Thank you, Will.
You are more than welcome. Today's going to be a good one, I am sure. And I want to talk about negotiation, but before we get into the hacks or the tips, tricks, and process, I want to ask a broader question, which will hopefully give a bit of context later down the line of the interview. And that question I want to ask is, how much control do you think that the average person actually has over what they do day to day? And how much stuff are they doing because they've chosen to do it? And how much stuff are they doing because that's what they've been told to do?
Oh, well, that's almost a metaphysical question there. Greater philosophy. And I'm the old wise man with the gray beard on the mountain that has all those answers, huh?
I hope so.
I think we go through a process basically where ideally, there's a balance between how much control we have and how much we want to do by rote, and which is actually plays right into the negotiation process. For me, also because we know that our brain has the capacity to only make so many decisions in a given day, and a good negotiation approach is one that helps somebody's brain function more effectively, interestingly enough. And there's several ways that we can do that. So we go on autopilot a lot during the day because we're trying to save our decision making for the things that we should be deciding each and every day. That would mean that maybe we're giving up some of the control of where we're going and what we're doing in a given day because we'll be more effective overall because of that. So I would offer to you that we have 1,000% of control of everything we do each and every day. Some of that control, like a good CEO, the CEO of our lives, we're delegating some of this to other people because we believe that by and large, this delegation helps us lead a more effective life. So I would say then that puts us down to, if we go on autopilot on a lot of things, there are fewer things that we're doing because we decided to that day, but we seceded control over to somebody else who's working in our best interests. That's the best way I could answer that.
I love it. And the reason I wanted to ask that, because I think I'd go further than what you said there, Chris, I think that most people, even the people that are looking to, people listen to the show who are going out of their way to improve in their careers, improve their ability to communicate, negotiate, and sell. I think that even us lot are still on autopilot for a lot of the day, and we'll get into the brain, how we can perhaps hack into that process and take people out of autopilot, and whether, because I don't know, maybe we want them to be in autopilot for negotiations to go smoothly, or maybe we don't want them to be. So we'll get into that later on.
Excellent.
But I thought that was a good way to tee up the show, because it's something I really believe passionately in, that we are blinded to how little control we actually we have the control, but I think we're blinded to how much we actually leverage that day to day. And sales negotiations are obviously a key part of that. And again, to guide my questions here, Chris, I want to get your thoughts on this. Which is more important for negotiations in general? Is it our emotional intelligence, our ability to leverage our gut feeling, that kind of thing? Or is it hacks? Is it process? Is it things that we do step by step?
Well, it's context. It depends upon where we're going with this. Emotional intelligence, first of all, um, we make all of our decisions based on what we care about. Uh, you can go back and forth about that, is whether or not it's rational, whether or not it's logical, but ultimately we decide based on what we care about. If you're willing to accept that, and it's hard not to accept it, then every decision is an emotional decision, because what you care about is based on your emotions, based on your passions. So emotional intelligence is going to come into play in each and every decision. There's a lot of scientific data that sort of routes how our thoughts go through our brains. And they start in the caveman, the animal, the reptilian center, the amygdala, and then it bounces into the rest of the brain, where we come up with rationalizations after the fact. There's some of that we'll take shortcuts into, we'll hack into, just because we understand the process. There's certain things in a negotiation. It's a good idea for me to make you stop and think when I need to get you to change your mind. And there are other times when actually I'm going to say things very specifically that are designed for easy for you to process, so you can come to a decision with less effort. So a lot of that is based on a context. What can I do in emotion and in negotiations to either lengthen or shorten the thought process? At the end of the day, a great negotiation is making a decision that sticks. My company and my philosophy, we preach yes is nothing without how. Well, what that means is you want to make deals that stick, that they don't back out of. Yes, all by itself, a temporary hypnotic state induced that a decision that somebody's not going to stick to, that doesn't do you any good. So my philosophy comes from the very beginning, is we have to make deals. A hostage negotiator has to make an agreement that the other side is going to stick to, because it's not like we can take them to court after the fact.
This is amazing. There's so much to go at here. I think even at this point, we're going to have you back on to dive into some of this in more detail, because we're only going to scratch the surface here. And the final question I want to ask, and these are all just teeing up the conversation we're going to have, but can you really, and you specifically perhaps, and then we can look at everyone else, can you really get anyone to do anything within reason perhaps? Is that an achievable goal for most people? In the context of B2B sales and getting most people to close a sale, not getting someone to run around and pretend they're a chicken and be naked, perhaps.
Emotional intelligence applied in negotiation. Knowledge isn't power, applied knowledge is power. And my book, again, is about applied knowledge. And it's the applied knowledge of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence applied is so powerful that Adam Grant recently wrote an article called The Dark Side of Emotional Intelligence, which is when you can really wrap your mind around the amount of influence you can have with emotional intelligence. Is frightening what you can pull off. The most manipulative, despicable characters in history manipulated and got anywhere from 2 to 2 million people to do what they wanted based on emotional intelligence. It's incredibly powerful. The approach, even Daniel Goleman recently called, what I call tactical empathy, is a version of what Daniel Goleman calls cognitive empathy. And he says it's what sociopaths do best. And a sociopaths love to manipulate regular people into doing things that they would never do otherwise. So there's an incredible amount of power with these skills. I got to tell you, I tell my clients, my students all the time, use your powers for good and not evil, because it's kind of stunning when you begin to understand what drives people in terms of fear of loss, or what we refer to as know what their religion is. If you know what somebody believes in larger than themselves, and you can connect a decision to what they believe in as larger than themselves, then you get Hindu pyramids in India that took thousands of years to build, not hundreds of years. They were built before there was any heavy equipment, and everybody that worked there for free. When was the last time you worked every waking moment on some task for nothing?
And is that the crux of negotiation? The skill to get down to someone's belief system and then put what you want them to do in front of them in alignment with that belief system. Is that the hack of all hacks? Is that the holy grail of negotiations?
Yeah, it really is. And people stick to deals that align with their belief systems. And that's why when you talk someone into something, you get a series of yeses, if you will, which is the worst way to negotiate possible. It's called mere agreement. And I say things to you: would you like to make more money? Would you like to go on vacations? Would you like to fly around in a jet airplane? And somehow I think that getting you to say yes 3 times in a row to that, I say, well, then give me $1 million. But the yesable agreement or the yes momentum or the mere agreement, that nonsense, that's exactly what it is. And what the problem with that is that it fails to align people with what they're doing, with what they believe in. And you can't make deals that stick if it doesn't line up with what their beliefs are.
So I know this is a deep topic. I know there's a lot of, you probably have to know a lot of this to know yourself to be able to get to and understand the beliefs of someone else as well. But is there a process? And what I mean from that perspective is there a practical step-by-step guide-ish that we can offer the audience that we could run through today to perhaps not complete the negotiation, but to get to understand the beliefs of someone you've just met that you have to negotiate with?
Yeah, it kind of is. I mean, you want to take a step back to start with, to give the other side room to talk, and then you want to encourage them to talk, and you definitely want to be understanding. Important move to make early on is to understand that is to accept that understanding is not agreement. And once you accept that understanding is not agreement, then you can come to an understanding with anyone. And that ends up opening some very powerful doors. And the more you talk with someone, what'll happen is they'll use adjectives when they are passionate about something. You're going to look for their adjectives, and you're going to look for the area that those adjectives are in. I was talking with a client that I recruited based on this conversation, who happened to use a lot of what I understood and knew to be born-again Christian terminology. And he was talking with me about the struggle that he had in his business and how the people in his business didn't understand what he was trying to do. And I heard enough of his terminology just to be able to use something similar. And I said, this particular project, it's really a stewardship for you, isn't it? Which is a term that resonated with him. And as soon as he heard me say that, I had a client. He knew that I understood how much it mattered to him. I actually went on board with him because I wanted to change his strategy, and he needed me to understand how much it resonated deeply with him before he would change.
And when you say he knew that you understood, to use your language there, did he know that on a conscious level? Was this a subconscious, like, gut feeling he had which made him progress forward? What are we aiming for here?
What we're aiming for, and it's a phrase, the solid gold phrase. The phrase that you're looking for above all others, and when you connect with someone else, is when they look at you and they say, "That's right." And what "that's right" does, and to get an effective "that's right," you've often had to summarize the situation and how they feel about it in a way that they didn't realize was true until you said it to them. And it can come in a variety of different formats. And it takes a little bit of practice. What we like to say is the learning curve is steep, but it's not high. So with a very slight amount of practice, you can bring your emotional intelligence up very, very quickly. But it takes a little bit of practice. And in anywhere from my negotiation to recruit a client that I was consulting with to I had to negotiate with my son to change his behavior and how he was playing football. And American football, they're like billy goats. They put their heads down and crash into each other. That's why they wear the big, heavy helmets, because they like to hit things. And he moved from a position where every single play he hit as many people as he could see to he had to start dodging these people and only hit the ball carrier. And it had been inculcated in him to hit everything. And if he was to get out of the way of somebody, it was actually going to be cowardly. And he didn't realize this. And when we wanted him to change positions where he started dodging people, he wouldn't do it. His coach yelled at him. I yelled at him. You're supposed to dodge blockers. You're supposed to dodge. And every time he'd look at us and he'd say the worst thing that your counterpart can say, which is "you're right." And when somebody wants you to shut up and go away, but they're trying to not hurt your feelings, they look at you and they say, "You're right." Because we love for people to look at us and say, "You're right." It makes us incredibly happy. And it's incredibly bad because he was trying to get us to shut up and leave him alone.
And just take a step back there. And I see you're on a roll here and you want to dive into this, and we'll use it as an example for sure.
All right.
But how did you get out of him that, because this seems to be key to me from our conversation, how did you get out of him that it was for him and his belief system that it was for him to be a wuss if he wasn't jumping into people? That seems like a massive step, which clearly, if you know the right phrases and how to go about it, probably it doesn't take that long because people like to talk about themselves and their feelings. But what was the process in that situation for you to pull that out of him?
Well, just observational. And some of it is actually, some people refer to it as inductive reasoning. What is likely true here? What's my gut telling me?
Okay.
And you can pick this up in a pretty short period of time. You don't have to know that much data about people to figure it out. And it's why people that are really good at what's called cold reads masquerade as psychics. Because if you sit down with a psychic, especially the first time you sit down with them, usually inside of 5 minutes, you're absolutely convinced that they've read your mind and your mental history, and they know so much about you, and they tell you the future. Well, what they are is they're the master of cold reads, and they know if they ask you a couple of questions and they don't act surprised, inside of 5 minutes, they can make you believe that you can see the future. And it's just on being a really good cold read. And they do it with practice. Now, in this particular instance with my son, when I know him to be, football is a game for people who like to battle. And he loved to battle. It doesn't take a genius to see people putting their heads down and crashing into each other ferociously to see that, is this a warrior mentality? That's a pretty good guess. So if he refuses to not hit people and he's got a warrior mentality, a really good educational, emotional intelligence guess must be, wow, it must be the opposite of being a warrior to get out of somebody's way. It's another word for that. It's cowardly. It's unmanly. And so now I'm taking educated guesses on emotional intelligence. And with hostage negotiation skills, what it does is help you take those guesses and turn this sort of into an information feedback loop where you start refining your guesses. And you get smarter every time, and you take it in a very accepting fashion so you're not startled by the answers. And that lines you up really quickly with where the other person is coming from. With a little bit of practice, it's amazing how quickly it can come to you.
Let's stop on this because this is absolutely fascinating to me. So is the process of doing this, and is this what we should be doing, in that you're going to a B2B sales meeting to hopefully close, say, a CEO? Should you then be on LinkedIn, see what sports they're into, and then you can make educated guesses on their personality, of whether they're into American football or whether they're into golf? You should perhaps make an educated guess on the fact that they're a CEO of a fast-moving, aggressive company. They could perhaps have personality traits that you could associate with that. What is the next step from them to come up with some words, how you use the word coward or cowardness to describe that situation? Should you come up with, aggressive strategy, perhaps different things to drop into a conversation? And then is the cold read that you're looking at the prospect and you're dropping in these words, and then you're seeing if they, from their body language, pep up or smile or nod and agree. And then you've kind of got a good basis of what resonates with them. Is that the first step? Have I missed out anything here? Because
that's good preparation, and it's very close to the kind of preparation how we would prepare for a negotiation. I mean, we've got a very specific model for it, and one of those is collecting a little bit of data to start with, and then you would do what we call a label, and that would be: it seems like, it sounds like, it looks like. It's a very simple, very concise. It's a very quick-moving way to delay in order to save time in negotiations, to start to trigger the data stream of information from your counterpart very quickly. And so if for some, and in the United States, I mean, we talk a lot about CEOs who are supposed to be passionate about their mission or have a passionate purpose. You know, everybody cares about something. I mean, it's whether or not they trust you. And if they're doing it for a living, there's something about it that they care about, whether or not they trust you enough to share it with you. So if we saw that their company had an aggressive strategy, I wouldn't want to be aggressive with them, but I would want to show them that I appreciated it. So I might start out by saying, like, look, it sounds like you guys really pride taking a strong, aggressive approach into the marketplace. Now, that's actually a bit of a test. It's a probe. It's a label of something that I've seen. They're going to come back with me. They're going to be really happy that I've seen this insight and that I've appreciated it. Well, the interesting thing on these things that we call labels, some people actually use it as the mislabel, as an intentional technique. And we will occasionally mislabel something on purpose because the reaction from the other side is like, no, this is what it is. I want you to understand that this is what it is. And then I'll spill all sorts of extra knowledge on it. We actually, from my law enforcement days, you know, we actually refer to this as vomiting information. You know, we want the other side to just start sharing stuff they care about so that we can see how our agreement would line up. At the end of the day, I will tell you that I want to make a deal that the other side makes money on. So I want this sort of influence with them because the last thing I want from them is to tell their own colleagues, friends, and the people they know, wow, I made so much money. It was such a great deal when I worked with Chris Voss. I want to say one or two things. We made a lot of money with those guys, or I want them to say, you know, we didn't make a deal with them, but I'd deal with them again. Mm-hmm. You know, my reputation precedes me wherever I go, and I want to use this stuff to help people prosper collaboratively with my company.
For sure. And I think that goes without saying for our audience as well. I think there's, from my experience with them and going back and forth, there's very few bad apples. So it goes without saying the ethics of all this.
If I can interrupt you for a second, though, because almost everybody that I talk to when they find out that I'm a negotiation consultant, the first words out of their mouth are, oh, my God, let me tell you about this negotiation. I had them over a barrel. I had this kind of leverage, and I made them do what I wanted them to do. That's not long-term success. What I teach people to negotiate after the fact, and what people say about them is like, that was a good deal. I don't want anybody bragging about slaughtering the other side, mainly because it's bad for business. When you kill your customers or you kill your negotiation partners, pretty soon you don't have any left.
For sure. I mean, it does have a place. And for me, it is for getting my girlfriend to do the dishes and things of that nature. But and I want to keep on with this thread, Chris, of you've got all this information about the person now. Of course, you've built massive rapport now with them because you're on the same wavelength. You're going back and forth. There's an element of trust, even if it's just a seed of trust rather than because you've not spent that much time going back and forth with them. What is the next step to, and this is perhaps the most difficult, I imagine, what's the next, and again, further context, and I know I'm dragging this question out, but further context in that you know for a fact your product is suited to them, it's going to be a win-win, all that good stuff. How do you go from having good rapport, bit of trust, having all this information flowing to you, which clearly is going to come in handy as you move the negotiation forward? How do you then align your product with their beliefs? Clearly, it's different every time, but is there a system to do that? Because that seems like the real crux to all this.
Right. And well, the best way to do it really is through a process that a lot of other communication skills share. It would be referred to as a guided discovery process. I mean, you want them, the light bulb, to go on over their head. You can tell somebody something, and in order to get it to stick in their brain, you have to tell them no less than 19 times. If you can get them to figure it out, then it sticks because they came to that. And the way you do that is you ask them the right what and how questions. Some people refer to it as the interrogative-led questions or the reporter's questions, who, what, when, where, how, and why. At the end of the day, they're all going to boil down to either what or how questions. How does this work for you? How does this line up with your company's objectives? What's the biggest challenge you face? What's the mission? What's the purpose of what you're trying to buy here? How does this fit for you? It's going to be a series of what and how questions so that ultimately they're making the deal for you. Because, again, it gets back to implementation. If it's my idea, it might happen. If it's their idea, it probably will happen, or they're going to knock themselves out trying to get it. So I'm going to have to gently guide them there in a process that's actually what we refer to as a delay in order to save time. This is how you have fewer conversations to make a deal. The conversations will tend to be a little longer, but your total time will be a lot less because you're off the gerbil wheel of having the same conversation over and over again that gets you nowhere.
I want you to critique me here a little, Chris. So
Right.
I do all the ad sales for the podcast purely because there's companies that want to represent us, but purely so that I can test everything that we talk about on the show. I've still got my foot in the game, so to speak, with sales, and I can talk about sales as a practitioner rather than not that I consider myself an expert or guru. But there's plenty of sales gurus and experts out there that wrote a book 20 years ago and still ramble on about it, and perhaps not the most relevant right this second. So critique me here, because I seem to be doing some of this massively unintentionally, just from experience rather than through a step-by-step process. But I know there's people that I've done deals with on the ads side of things that will listen to this show, and they'll probably be laughing listening in the car at the moment. But I always start our conversations with the question of, when I first get them on the phone, do you listen to podcasts? 99% of the time, it's yes, I listen to X, Y, Z. My next question is, well, do you listen to the whole show? You go, yeah, you tend to listen to the whole thing. And are you paying attention to it as you're going through it versus like a TV advert? And this is obviously where I'm leading them. As soon as the advert comes on, when you're watching TV, you've got your phone out, you've got your laptop out, you turn to speak to the person next to you. Whereas a podcast, you're typically listening on your own. So you're engaged because there's nothing else there. And if you're driving, of course, you're not on your phone, you're still listening. So I start asking them these questions, and I keep going further and further down the line of, what podcast do you listen to? If they listen to, for example, a super popular podcast is the Tim Ferriss Show, I ask them, have you ever been on any of the products, or have you ever bought any products that they get advertised on there? A lot of the time they have. And then, of course, the conversation is done then. They see the value of podcast advertising. They see the engagement. They see the massive growth in our audience, and it's kind of sold itself. Am I doing, again, unintentionally, I've not planned any of this out. It just seemed to have come naturally from experience of having calls that have gone terrible and calls that have gone well. But is that an example of a guided discovery process? Am I doing the right thing here? And is there anything you would improve upon from how I've just described?
Every time you're on a what or a how question, and I heard several of them in there, those are good. Those are good guided discovery questions. What you're trying to do, there's three kinds of yeses. There's commitment, there's confirmation, there's counterfeit. Now, your first question, do you listen to podcasts? Which you mean simply as a confirmation yes. You're just trying to confirm something. When I hear that, I know you're going someplace with that. And that's what happens with every single confirmation yes. And that's what the very nefarious people do to try to talk me into something I don't want. Now, I've had that done to me so many times that the minute that you ask the innocent confirmation yes, my mind, I immediately start backing up. I'm worried about what this yes is letting me in for. And one of the things that we do on a regular basis is we teach people to take our yes-oriented, closed-ended questions, which is your first question. Do you listen to podcasts? And flip them into where I get the same sort of information, but the answer is no, because when someone says no, they feel protected, they center themselves, they're actually more open to listening right after they've said no. So I might be, do you find podcasts to be a waste of time? Well, no. And so I would sprinkle I would take the occasional question where you're trying to get a yes and I turn it into where I'm trying to get a no out of it, and it moves me forward. It's going to center them more, and they're going to feel more in control. And they're going to, every time I get worried about what I'm letting myself in for with a yes, then actually you lose my focus. And when you're trying to make a case, the last thing you want to do is lose my focus. But every single time you try to get me to say yes, I get defensive. I worry about where it's going. I start asking myself questions. I start thinking if I can outsmart you. All these thought processes are now distractions where I am not paying attention to you.
This is, if anyone watched it on YouTube on the video side of things, I've got a massive grin on my face at the moment. And this is a light bulb moment for me, because as you were saying that, I was putting it into context of that question that I would ask. And perhaps it's a heavy hitting question to ask right off the bat, and you might have to lead up to it a bit more. But if I said that to someone who is clearly pre-qualified in that they've got on the phone call with me, they know a little bit about what I'm doing. I generally don't speak to anyone until they've read the media kit, so they know that we've sent 1.2 million brand messages over the past 6 months, all these kind of things. So they're pre-qualified at that point. If I ask them the question how you framed it, they're going to say, no, of course I think there's value in podcasts, otherwise I won't be on the phone with you. And so you've gone from just a general yes and being led somewhere, how you described it, to the immediately helping you out and arguing your case, even though they don't know why they're doing it, perhaps. That's brilliant. I've never had anyone put it in that context before. I really appreciate that.
There's a lot to be said for that. We really realized in how stringing together the no's. We were pounding on no pretty hard in the usefulness as an answer. And one of my students in my class at Georgetown University in the MBA program, he happened to be working at a political fundraising group that called people on the phone at night and asked them for money. And the typical process, especially on a phone, is you get 3 yeses in a row and then you ask for the money. That's nonsense of a yesable proposition or the yes momentum or the mere agreement. It even has the title that's backed up by a study. So he went to work that night and took all 3 of the yes questions and just flipped them into no's. And instead of, do you want to see the Republicans in the White House in November? The first question was, have you given up on taking back the White House in November? And the no script and the yes script was ran side by side that night. And the yes script, or the no script got a 23% higher donation rate. Almost a quarter, a 23% increase. That's no small increase. And it was then that we began understanding how a no can be a great answer and not just an obstacle to be overcome.
And we'll just wrap up this part of the show with this question. Is that because people are more likely to run away from pain than they are to run towards pleasure?
I think that's a portion of it. Yeah, it definitely has to do with fear of loss, fear of pain, what you're protecting yourself from. And I think that's absolutely part of it.
Amazing stuff. Well, Chris, I've got a couple of questions I ask everyone that comes on the show. First one, who is the world's greatest? In fact, no, I was going to say world's greatest salesperson. Let me flip this on its head for you especially. Who is the world's greatest negotiator?
It's an interesting question. I mean, other than me.
Who would you not want to go in a room and negotiate? I know you're going for a win-win, but negotiate against.
Well, that's all right. So context is really important here. A great negotiator is going to make a good deal with you.
Yeah.
So myself and people within my company, we like negotiating with each other all the time because we're trying to find a better deal. There's an old saying, never be so sure of what you want that you wouldn't take something better. So the great negotiator helps you find something better, somebody that you could trust. Depending upon the circumstances, the very assertive, very aggressive negotiator, as a hostage negotiator, that's who I was built to handle. So, some people would say, and to pick Donald Trump, Mr. Trump seems to be the poster child for the aggressive negotiator. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for Mr. Trump. But Donald Trump is going to want to whoop my backside in a negotiation. So if I'm talking to him, I better really want what we're talking about because it's going to be an unpleasant, combative experience the entire time.
And
Now, I know,
is that true? And I'm assuming you don't know him. Clearly, I don't know him. But do you think behind closed doors he still has that aggressive, I'm I want to make America great kind of persona, or do you think he's intelligent enough to drop that if the deal's worth it to just close the deal?
um, I think he's probably much better at negotiations than what he shows in his marketing currently. His political stance is marketing. It's not negotiations.
Hmm.
And he's a great marketer, and he's found something that resonates really well. Um, the other thing I notice about him too is you don't hear a lot of people from New York who've done business with him for a long time coming out and bad mouthing him. And there are a lot of people that you would expect would be coming out of the woodwork and bad mouthing him if they were really unhappy with him. So you raised a couple of interesting questions. I also know, from what little I know that there were projects in New York that didn't come to fruition, and he moved on. So I'm not sure about his long-term partnerships. I don't have a lot to say there one way or the other because I don't have direct experience. Um, on the surface, it doesn't look like his long-term partnerships are great, but I could be wrong because people are so happy they're keeping to themselves about it.
Fair enough. It's an interesting perspective I've not heard before, and so I appreciate that from you, Chris. And another one here that I don't ask every guest because some guests give me this wishy-washy answer of, I like seeing that my customers are happy and they're making money, but I want you to go deeper than this if you can. What motivates you personally to close deals?
Well, I want to be better off. I want to, I, I like to create something that wasn't there to begin with, which is why I like creative and innovative deals where I've given you something that I could give away easily, and you've given me something back that you could give away easily, and it's incredibly valuable for both of us. The high value trade. I mean, I like doing stuff that other people weren't able to do. And so I'm looking for a great high value trade. And then it makes me much better off based on what I'm doing. I want to be wealthy. I want to have a great future for myself, for my family, my friends. I want to take great vacations. I want to have a fair amount of leisure time. And I don't want people hating me over how I got it. So that's kind of what motivates me in order to do this. And I want you to get stuff out of this too. I want you to really like doing business with me. I like to say I have a mercenary and a missionary purpose. I want you to like doing business with me because it's going to bring me more money. If you like doing business with me, I make more money. If you like doing business with me because you like me, it also makes me happier. We're both ultimately happier as individuals. And actually, there's a lot of data out now that shows that the happier you are, the more successful you are likely to become. I read an interesting piece recently that if you want your success to bring you happiness, it's going to be a struggle, but your happiness can bring you success primarily because our brains work up to 31% more effectively if we're happy. In a positive frame of mind, we're actually smarter. We can make decisions faster. We can make better decisions, more good decisions faster by being happy. So me being happy makes me feel good and helps me prosper. And that's what I want for you and me because we'll both be better because of it.
Awesome. I appreciate your candid answer there, Chris. And I've got one final question for you before you tell us a little bit about the book. And that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at sales?
By and large, I push people a little bit more nicely. And I actually had a conversation where I was brought back into an FBI office recently, and what does your retired FBI agent, what does he say now to the younger guy? I wouldn't be any less assertive. I would focus more about being much more likable than I was. I mean, my career by and large, I was always focused on being respected. And I thought that you could be respected or you could be liked. You can't control whether or not you're liked. You can control whether or not you're likable. So I would increase. I wouldn't back off on anything. I would have been nicer about it.
I love it. I love it. Chris, with that, I want you to tell us a little bit about your book And for everyone that is genuinely intrigued, because I am, I've been really fully entertained and really, I've got a lot out of this show that I'm going to have to go and look back on myself. So for everyone who is as intrigued as I am, tell us a little bit about the book and where we can find out more about you as well.
All right, so the book is The Application of Hostage Negotiation to Business Negotiation. And it's not try this and see if it works, because I made my MBA business school students try it to see if it would work. So what I've got is just lots and lots of examples of somebody taking a hostage negotiation skill, very specifically how they used it to make a better deal. From everything from a Wall Street transaction to a business-to-business government contracting transaction to one of my students sold a marijuana shop in Spain using the negotiation skills. So the universal applicability of these hostage negotiation skills. And I use them, everybody use them. Check the Amazon reviews of my book. And what you'll see is overwhelmingly people talking about how they use the knowledge to begin making a difference almost immediately. It's readable, it's understandable. Some of it is counterintuitive, like you would never think that this works, unless I'd given you the 3, 4, 5 examples that shows you exactly how we made it work. Make the ideas three-dimensional, how it applies across the board. And what I got an email earlier today. I had him put the email up as a testimonial on LinkedIn. He said, I got to tell you, your book is phenomenal. The no-oriented questions, I've used, have you given up on this project 3 times before I even finished the book, and it's put money in the bank. I got another person sent me a LinkedIn email saying, I read your book on the way to the business meeting. We closed the deal 2 weeks early because of what you told me. That tells me that it's readable, it's digestible, it's not complicated. Getting to Yes is a fundamentally sound book, and people read that and wonder how to apply it. All right, so I understand, separate the position from the interest and find out their interest, but how do you do that? Well, you don't wonder how to do that after you've read my book. I think it's powerful applied knowledge where you can make great deals. People pick up the information fast and they try stuff that they never thought of doing, and they make deals.
Good stuff. And for a behind the scenes kind of tidbit here, for putting the questions together for the guests and for yourself, Chris, I always go and look at the Amazon reviews, because the good ones will say, I learned this, this, and this, and they were the most impactful things. So that's what I then want to talk about on the show. And then I don't know the numbers, but I know that on your book in particular, the overwhelming majority, if not literally nearly all the reviews, are positive. And because what I usually do is then look at the negative reviews, and I don't know if there was many or any. I can't even remember now because I did the questions a week ago. But I remember it was a pointless exercise to look at the negative ones, because what I typically then look is the things to avoid talking about. And yeah, as a behind the scenes insight for everyone listening and any podcasters listening. So I appreciate what you're saying there. The reviews are superb. And with that, Chris, I want to thank you for your time. I will definitely have you back on, because I said this at the top of the show. I feel like we've only scratched the surface of this. We've not got past building rapport and kind of half a line in the product yet. There's so many more steps to go. So we'll have you back on in the future to discuss it in more detail. And with that, Chris, I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Thank you. It was amazing. I love the conversation. Thank you very much.
And there we have it, Chris. Thank you for coming on the show. Really appreciate your time. Really appreciate your insights. It was a really interesting episode. I really enjoyed recording it with you. I want to thank you, Sales Nation. If you've not subscribed and you listen to the show, make sure you subscribe on iTunes. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'm waving as I say that, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button below. And with all that said, I'll speak with you all again tomorrow.